Hello, Year 9. So, over the next few weeks, we're going to be starting to look at the final part of the living world topic, and that's cold environments. So, as with tropical rainforests, there will be a workbook which is available in reception at school, but also I have attached a copy with class charts which you can print out. So, you can either print it out like you did before. You can type straight into it, some of you have done, or you can go into school, into reception, and you can safely get a copy for yourself. And then once work is finished, you can take a picture like you've been doing, or you can attach it and email it across to your teacher with the work completed so we can check that and give you feedback. So the first thing we're going to be looking at is where cold environments are. So there's a whole new sort of movement away from tropical rainforests. And the booklet looks like this. Okay, and I'll be talking through that and through these PowerPoints. And if you have any questions as we go along or as you're doing the work, you can obviously email us. So the first thing I want you to think about is on the back of the booklet, can you look at the picture? And this is one of Miss Pedder's friends. And I want you to think, what can you see in this picture? Can you guess two guesses where this might be in the world? And one reason that you think we should be protecting places like this. Why would these places be important to protect? And then once you've done that, if you look here, there is a YouTube clip, and it just gives you a bit of background about a place which is located in a cold environment. Okay, so that's the first bit. When we go into the booklet, you'll see that as before, it's got the specification. So it's got details of what we need for the exam. So what the vital things we'll learn, and obviously the extra things that we'll learn to make you better geographers. And it's got the contents of the booklet. And in this fortnight period, we'll be looking at lesson 1, characteristics of cold environments, and lesson 2, interdependence and biodiversity, which are words that we've come across before. So this is going to be good revision as well. So the first lesson starts on page 3, and it's looking at the characteristics of cold environments. So what are they like? Okay, so we're going to be able to locate them, describe them, and start to maybe explain differences between different types of cold environments. And the main types are polar, tundra, and alpine. And the first task I want you to do is on that page 3, just to understand what these places are like. So there are two clips for you to have a look at. So video 1 is going to be attached to the class charts, and video 2 is as a YouTube link there, which I'm slightly covering, but you'll be able to see it. I'll attach that YouTube clip link so that you can access it. And just want you to watch those two and just think, what do you already know about these environments and what things surprise you? You don't need to write these down anywhere. It does say you write them down, but don't just think about it. And then the first task is looking at where these places are. So where do we find polar, tundra, and alpine environments? And I want you to use the map on the PowerPoint here to fill in the map in your booklet. Okay, so use 3 colors as accurately as possible. Shade where you find polar, where you find tundra, and where you find alpine environments. And what would be great if you actually give an example of each one. So you can see the Greenland ice sheet has been labeled already. Can you label where alpine cold environments are found? So that's the sort of patches which are in mountain areas. And can you label where tundra cold environments are found? So that's the starter and the challenge on page 3. Now, here we've got a climate graph of a cold environment, Yakutsk in Russia, which is in Siberia. So I went there in about 2005, and there's a lake there which completely freezes over in the winter. And they used to run a railway across the lake, but about 100 years ago, a train was going across and it crashed through the ice into the lake, and everyone died on board. So they stopped doing that. But as we can see from the climate graph, the temperature rarely goes above sort of 18 degrees, even in the height of summer in this tundra region. Okay, so we do get some melt of ice, but underneath there's this layer of ice called permafrost, which never melts, but it gets down to -40, -42 degrees centigrade. And the rainfall is very low. So even at the highest, you can see with the bar chart that the rainfall rarely gets beyond 213 millimeters overall. That's for the annual for the year. So, okay, so low rainfall, and what there is often falls as snow. And you can see your Cook's is the arrow there showing where that place is. Now, as I mentioned, tundra can melt in the summer, whereas polar regions often are frozen all year round. Okay, so what you would find in polar regions are things like the Antarctic ice sheets, and very small amounts of vegetation. So tundra would look like this potentially, especially in the summer where it's melted, and polar regions permanently frozen, so Antarctica and the very far north. So the next task is to read pages 4 and 5 and look at the differences between polar and tundra, which are the two main cold environments we'll be looking at, and then complete the task on page 5. So compare the two environments, use two colours, have a key, and decide which of these statements describe polar regions and which describe tundra environments. Okay, and think about the key differences between those two environments. And then task 2 is to have a look at page 5. Think about what you've just read, and try and explain why polar environments, so that's the very far north and south, why are they found at the extreme latitudes? So think back to when we did tropical rainforests. How much sunlight are we getting at the equator? Why does that explain why it's so hot and wet at the equator? And then think about what's happening to that same level of insolation, sunlight, at the very far north and south. And think, how does that explain why these polar environments are found at the extreme north and south latitudes? And see if you can use these 4 keywords: further, equator, sun's rays, larger area, in your answer. Okay, and that's on page 5. And then last thing here is have a look on page 6, and I want you to have a go at this exam style question. Okay, so using the information to try and compare and contrast the characteristics of tundra and polar cold environments. So that means look at the similarities and differences between tundra and cold environment. Now on the next slide, I'm going to give you some sentence starters and help to do that. So I want everyone to have a go at this and think what I need to do for a 6-mark answer. So how many points would I need? So here we've got a talk through of it. So you might start by saying the climate in polar regions has temperatures that can fall below, and give the example. And in contrast, the climate in tundra environments is. So what's the difference in temperature? What's the difference in rainfall between those two? And then that might be worth 2 marks. Then you might talk about the difference in soils between the two environments. And finally, you might talk about the difference in animals or plants. Okay, so for 6 marks, you would make 3 contrasting or similar points. Okay, so use that to help you answer that question. And then finally, to finish this first part of the 2 lessons this fortnight, I want you to just look at how have you done this lesson? What do you feel confident about? What are you not so sure about? And just fill that in the traffic light exit ticket, and just actually annotate it. What is it that you're happy with, and what do you think you need to know more about? And this might help with your revision tasks when you start thinking, what do I need to revise when I think of this topic? Okay, so next one then, it's lesson 2, so the second part of the 2 weeks of work. And starting off by doing the starter, do it now task, silent starter, but obviously you don't have to be silent at home necessarily. And then think about these things. Which of these characteristics do you think are a polar environment rather than tundra? So think about the difference between those two environments. Can you decide which one of those is polar, examples of a polar environment? And then I want you to define biodiversity and define interdependence. Now think back, you know what these terms mean. You've looked at these when you were doing tropical rainforests. So think about breaking those words down. What does bio mean? What does diversity mean? Do you think the biodiversity is high or low in tundra and polar regions? And then secondly, what is interdependence? Again, think about what those words mean, break them down. Once you've done that, we're going to start looking at the second lesson. So looking at biodiversity and interdependence in cold environments. And we've got the objectives there and in the booklet. So we're thinking about those 2 terms. And the first task is reading page 8 and 9 in the booklet. And then have a look at the question at the bottom of page 8 and the question at the bottom of page 9. Okay, so think about how might some animals adapt to environments where you've got harsh winters. So not just physical adaptations, changes, but how might their behavior change? How might they adapt their behavior? And then secondly, on page 9, can you identify one of the food chains found in the web on page 9? So remember, the web is what's happening between all the animals in that ecosystem, but the food chain would just be one line. So how one thing affects another, affects another, affects another. So can you just pull out one food chain from that food web on page 9? And then there's a video for you to watch. That's on class charts. So it's lesson 2, and it's just a video showing the wolves hunting the bison. And think about, when you're watching that video, how are they interdependent? How has each species adapted to survive in the tundra environment? Not just the way they have adapted in terms of their fur and the physical changes, but what about their behavior as well? And there is the food web that I mentioned that's on page 9 in the booklet. Okay, so just pick out a food chain from that web. And then finally, last thing with this second lesson is having a look at another 6-mark question, because it's really important we practice these 6-mark questions, because there are no 9-mark questions in this topic. There will be no 9-mark questions in the living world topic at all. So it's important we really nail the 6 markers. So I want you to think about this question. Explain why the biodiversity levels in cold environments mean that interdependence is particularly important in these places. So why is the low biodiversity in these areas means it's so important that there's interdependence between species? Okay, and these are some ideas here of how you might start answering that question. So think about the biodiversity, think about what interdependence is, and explain why the interdependence is so important in these places. More important maybe than in other environments where there's much higher biodiversity. And then when you've done that, you can actually have a go at marking your own answer. So use this mark scheme on this slide to think, okay, how well did I do? How many marks would I give myself and why? Okay, so actually sort of annotate it to say what you gave yourself, and more importantly, say why you gave yourself that mark. Again, that's the 2 lessons we're going to do for this fortnight. So there's a few things to watch, a few things to do, and a bit of reading. And obviously, what you can then start to do is, for your weekly homework revision, you can maybe start to choose some of the cold environment options that are on the homework takeaway menu. Okay, some of you have been doing those already, but it's probably better to actually do the work and then go back over those things. Okay, so now you get to choose from hazards or tropical rainforest or ecosystems, or maybe some of the cold environment revision tasks as well. So it expands the options you've got for revision. And remember, send the work through to your teacher. You can send it through class charts or attaching it to an email. You can take a picture, or you can attach the work that you've done straight in Word, and then they will get back to you and give you some feedback on that. And if you've got any questions at all, just email your teacher at their email address, and they will get back to you as soon as they can. Okay, so we'll speak to you all soon, and good luck with the work. By the way, for that last question, once you've marked it, here is a really good example. Miss Pedder marked this one and gave it 6 out of 6. So think about what is good about this answer, compare it to yours, think about what could be improved. Okay, all right, see you later.